foster care and adoption has helped me see the humanity of people in much more nuanced and empathetic ways.
Okay, everyone, welcome back to What's the Dill, a place where we talk about the most viral questions about Catholic life. I'm your host, Pete Dill. As you guys have seen, I've been doing some more interviews recently. I've been feeling convicted to branch out. So we have a great guest on today. This is one guy I thought I need to talk to, Ryan O'Hara, because he is not only a dynamic Catholic speaker, he's not only an incredible Catholic man, a great father. He's someone I've known for 15 plus years and someone I've always looked up to as an example of faith, example of using technology, medium, videos to spread the faith. So when I was like, all right, we need to do interviews, we got to get this guy. This is one of my white whales. So Ryan, thank you so much for coming to the podcast, man.
You're welcome. I've been looking up to you too, Pete, because you're so tall all of these years.
You know, being tall is one of my best attributes.
It is. And you are a baller to boot.
So, I used to be.
You used to be, and a famous one at that, which anyway, I would show my kids like you on Sports Center, and I'm sure we've rehearsed that on the podcast. But anyway,
I'm just glad you're
the famous Pete Dill.
Dude, I am glad your kids didn't see me shooting around with my son the other day at our local court, because it was bad as could be.
Well, dude, you're out there.
Appreciate
out there.
You,
Thanks for having me. It's great to be here, Pete. Thank you.
You got it, Ryan. Thank you so much. So let's jump right in, man. Like, tell me a little bit about your story. I'd love to hear your story about how you came to know Christ and how you were, whether you grew up Catholic or converted, just tell me a little bit about your background and story.
Well, I imagine, 32 years ago. Gosh, this dates me a bit. So fall of 1992, this Catholic guy shows up at this Protestant college. I didn't know what Baptists were. I thought they were some branch of Catholicism I hadn't encountered yet. But I ended up going to this Baptist college and had a great experience there. But I showed up and I was, faithful Catholic, my whole life growing up. And pretty soon kind of bad grades, bad beer, bad relationships. And I just found myself kind of fading away. And in fact, pretty quickly, like I realized a couple of weeks in, like, if I don't go to mass, like nobody will know. And actually it wasn't because I didn't believe, or it's not even that I didn't want to go. It just was easier not to go.
Yeah.
And I didn't have a car and you had to kind of figure out a carpool thing, and there wasn't anything on campus. And so I just faded and kind of went out the back door. Nobody noticed. And I barely noticed, but I was living this kind of, I was really, I was just so taken by what college could be. And, I went to this all boys Catholic high school, great school in Omaha, Nebraska, Creighton Prep. Shout out to, the Jesuits there. I had a great education, even some great spiritual experiences.
Yeah.
But my faith wasn't my own. Mm-hmm. And I was really excited. Like there were fraternities and sororities and girls there. I went to all boys school, and just all this stuff. It was amazing. And I just really kind of found my social niche and leaned into that. Yeah. Had a blast. And but a few years in, something was missing.
Yeah.
And in fact, there was a guy who had hunted me down like from day one. He was so persistent. It's this Christian guy on campus. He was an RA, and he would invite me week in and week out to this Bible study. And week in and week out, I would say no. And again, as a Catholic, I was like, I don't know, Bible study. What's that? I was like, I don't know what we're doing there. So no. And he would invite me. I mean, he was so persistent. He must have invited me 50 times. And I 50 times said no, leave me voicemails. And anyway, finally, by my junior year, this is a couple years in, he invites the girl I was in a relationship with to this retreat. And I thought, maybe I wonder if I should go to that. And he invited me, and I, of course, went. And I heard the gospel. I heard the good news there. And on a weekend away, and I heard that God loved me and he had forgiven my sins, and that the response was to love him back with all of your heart, mind, soul, and strength. And I really desired that. It was a really interesting place. It was this Baptist college, but there was a real social division between kind of the Christians on one part of the campus, and like everybody in fraternities and sororities. And it was a small campus, like 1,200 students.
Yeah.
So I had this like longing to live this different way of life. Why were the Christians so joyful?
Yeah.
Like what was going on in how they related to each other? And my life didn't have that kind of inherent joy. I was having a lot of fun.
Yeah.
But I wouldn't say I was joyful. And it was all, and then there wasn't beer involved, or like hooking up with girls, or like that wasn't the thing.
Yeah.
And it was curious to me. And I sort of found myself on their turf at this retreat. And I remember, so then the end of the story goes that I got home, and I remember being up in my little room in my fraternity house, and I pick up the landline, call my mom. I had a great relationship with my mom. My dad at that point had Alzheimer's disease many years in. And so my closest family relationship was with my mom. So I call her up and I was like, listen, Mom, went on this retreat. It was pretty great. But here's the deal. They're like saying that God is like supposed to be the number one, relationship in my life. But if I'm honest, you're probably the most important relationship in my life. And I said, I don't know what to do with that. And she's like, thank you, Ryan. That's really sweet. Mom was probably pretty encouraged or something in that moment. My son is calling me from college, telling me how much he loves me.
Right.
But she's like, I love that. Thank you very much, Ryan. But I want to give you permission to put God first in your life. And man, it was like something changed right there. And I just began pursuing a relationship with Jesus, began praying on a daily basis, but most importantly, got connected to a group of guys from that retreat. And we just met every Sunday night, and just said, here's what's going on. Here's where I'm at. Here's life. Here's where I need prayer. I didn't even know what prayer was, but it sounds like I could use prayer, here. And that's where I learned to pray out loud. That's where I learned to get into the scriptures. And the other cool thing that happened, none of them, they were all like evangelical Protestants. Not one of them encouraged me to consider leaving the church, which was really neat. And so I went back to the sacraments and went back to mass, and like everything had come to life because of that encounter that I had with Jesus and the decision I made, to follow him in that way. So that was college. And that's where my faith really came to life.
Wow. That's a powerful story. And I think a lot of young guys have an experience of, I grew up Catholic, I'm now in college, I'm making my own decisions, I don't know what to do with this agency. So to hear your mom kind of speak into that agency, that's obviously transformative. What do you think is a thing that is, why do you think it's a challenge for guys to have that agency or ownership as a college student, aside from obviously like the temptations or the way of college lifestyle? Well, what else do you think a little deeper?
Yeah. Well, I think it's because for many, just take average Catholic guy, teenager, when they look around, they mostly see other guys like them. Everybody's like required to be at mass.
Yeah.
Are any of those guys choose it? Like, if all of a sudden mom and dad weren't going to taking you to mass this next Sunday, would you go?
Right.
Probably not, for many.
Right.
And so in general, faith isn't something that's personal or chosen at that point. I mean, I don't know how many things guys would do, teenage guys would do, except now like play video games or something, where someone isn't saying you have to do X. And until you get to college and everything is on you, you actually start going towards the things that are easier, that you kind of have this like desire to do, like stuff that's comfortable or fun or easy, or but then hopefully you, hopefully you can kind of ride that out and kind of understand the power that you have as a young man. I'll tell you a quick story. Like, there were two things that happened that really started to change, that were like the precursor to this conversion.
Mm-hmm.
Number one, I came home after my freshman year, and it was like I had like a 2.2 or something. And it was my stepdad, because again, my dad had Alzheimer's disease. My mom had remarried and all this stuff. Well, anyway, my stepdad called me out and was like, listen, your mom and I are paying a bunch of money. Actually, I think he put it even like, your mom is paying a bunch of money and you're kind of missing it right now. Like, what are you doing? And he, but it wasn't a scolding, but it was like, he called me higher.
Yeah.
And he actually wrote out this thing, and I still have it to this day in handwriting, handwritten letter. And he called it the contract. July 31st, 1993. I still have this. And he wrote it all out, and he signed it, and I signed it. But it was basically like, I am agreeing to work my ass off the next few years to get a 3.0. Like, and so he set that before me. So in order to get a 3.0, I had to get mostly A's from there on out. Well, that, like, choosing that and going, I want that, and I'm going to sacrifice this and this to get that. That actually was like, this growth in virtue was the kind of preparation ground for this sort of encounter with this bigger thing, which was God, And so I was finally learning how to say no to myself so that I could actually say yes to something. So if you can't say no, you can't really say your no. You can't really say yes to something if you can't also say no to something. And so I learned the power of no and the power of yes. So I think that's what happens. I think most of the time you just look around and go, well, the model we're seeing isn't one of agency. It's more like doing what I'm told. Yeah. But then at some point it has to switch. And I remember too, like my mom, God bless her, she was a wonderful mom. But one of the things she didn't do, she always cleaned my room, Pete, when growing up, Right. And so I remember I was the worst roommate. I was an ass. Like, the place was a mess because there was no mom around to clean up. and my roommate he was so pissed. And to say also, like, I remember also, I was a jackass. I was such a jerk. He had a call. This is back in the day when we had calling cards. Okay. I don't even know if you know about calling cards, Pete, but we would buy minutes to make long distance phone calls on a landline.
Oh my gosh.
Think about that.
Yeah.
So he had like $100 phone card. I like burned through it because he's like, yeah, you could borrow it. And what he meant was like, maybe occasionally. Well, I burned through it. And then even more so, and it made his mom charged her credit card,
right.
So I was just doing stupid stuff like that. Right. And, but something then clicked. I remember sitting in the, grime and dirt and mess of my room. And all of a sudden woke up. It's like, I actually like clean rooms.
Right.
And right then and there, I realized nobody's here to do it except for, this is my job now.
Yeah.
And so I think, again, these are all extreme examples of, like, if you look around and nobody is calling you to hire and no one is letting you know this is yours, at college, you got to sink or swim on it. And that's where I think it happens most beautifully because guys have to make a choice.
Yeah. It's so funny to I'm thinking about you as a roommate. And like, I think that is when a young man doesn't have his mom around, sometimes they're going to be like, well, I don't know. Like, how do I even make a bed? How do
I do my laundry? Right. All these things.
Yeah.
Seriously.
Yeah. And it's amazing because, like, the Lord also I feel like he uses practical realities to bring us closer to him. You said, like, he used your GPA and kind of a challenge to step into the man you needed to be, to also like nurture you spiritually. I know, like, in my own life, I was saying this recently on a podcast episode. Like, I think about what I've done with this podcast, What's the Dill? And it's like, well, the number one person who's got the most out of this and drawn close to Christ is me. Like, I've had the greatest jump in my faith through this.
Sure.
And it's because the Lord is using skills and things in my life that I like and I'm passionate about to draw me closer to him. It's like these practical realities. So you graduate college. you're kind of a young man. Like, what do you talk to me about keeping that faith as a young man post college and the importance of like brotherhood or community? Because you kind of hinted at that. I'd love
Yeah.
to hear kind of your take on that.
Yeah. Well, I would say that's been probably one of the main constants kind of in my life, wherever I've been. And it started those first weeks after my conversion, that I would say almost, I don't know, 30 years now, save just a few stretches in my life since then. 30 years now of having some kind of accountability group of men that I meet with, at least twice a month
Mm-hmm.
for the last 30 years. Again, save a few stretches as we're transitioning to new places and this and that. But it's just, that is the going to mass, praying on a daily basis, and being in some kind of committed group of guys where we're going to be honest about what's going on in our life and love and support each other and kind of call each other to more. That has been the difference maker. I always think, like, after the sacraments, after my daily prayer life, being in that kind of relationship has meant the world. And I honestly, I can't imagine my life without that kind of thing. Because again, I think, again, most guys, I don't know what it is. Maybe it's just most people. If there isn't that set of guys, I might just eventually kind of sneak out the back door. And it's like an insurance. It's like, I think of it like an insurance policy. I know if it's up to me, if it's just up to me, I'm going to probably peace out. Not immediately,
Yeah.
but over time be like, I'm kind of tired of that. But those guys are waiting for me. Those guys are expecting me. We're in the group chat. The meeting is always this night at this place at this time. And I can't just not show up.
Yeah.
And so then those meetings kind of string things along over the years, but then also going on a men's retreat, every year, going on my silent retreat every year with other men
Mm-hmm.
is a really important grounding. And it also, you grow in self-awareness in a way that, again, if you're just on your own, we tend to not see things about ourselves. But the mirror, we talk about, like, kind of what does community do? It's like it's a mirror, it's sandpaper, it's a flashlight. This mirror, it kind of reflects back to you who you are, these other guys. The flashlight kind of shines a light on some things maybe that are hard to see or that are in the dark. And then the sandpaper, of just your preferences and kind of what you might normally do get kind of bump up against each other, and it refines you, and it helps make you a better man.
Yeah, cannot do this life on our own. And the modern man, pull yourself up by your bootstraps,
Sure.
independent. It's just like such a lie. And but what I love is the fruits of like a Christian group. Like, you saw the fruits. You're like, those guys are joyful, not just having fun, but they're joyful. There's something else. And the fruits, I mean, it's a great sales tool. Using your story, I'm listening to your story. Like, if I'm a young guy, how can I draw closer to Christ? What's something you suggest? I need some advice.
Yeah. Well, first of all, I mean, you have to start thinking like your life is not about you. I think that's one of the first things that, if I was to like look back, I don't know if I knew that then. I've started to learn that your life isn't about you. Pretty quickly, you're probably going to get married. Pretty quickly, you're probably going to be a dad. And if marriage doesn't teach you that your life isn't about you, your kids certainly will. Yeah. And so the sooner you realize that your life is not about you, and that having that vision just starts to take care of a lot of things, and that there's a bigger picture that you're being kind of called into. And so that's kind of the first step is, but you also, you got to be connected to a group of guys. So what are you doing? Who are the guys around that you could meet with on a regular basis, just to do very simple things, to pray, to open up the scriptures and talk about them, and then be honest about how you're doing with those things, with in your marriage. How are you doing with your kids? How are you doing in your relationship with God? Just answering a few of those basic questions. That's all you need to get going. Even if you did just that, and meet at a guy's house, don't meet at the church, because that can be too formal.
Yeah.
Go into a place where you feel comfortable. Don't meet out at a bar. Like, okay, other things are going to start happening there. Right. You don't have to bring food into it always. You can if you want, but meet together for 90 minutes every 2 weeks, and pray together and read the scriptures and talk about what the scriptures are saying, and then share about your life. You'll be amazed at the spiritual fruit from that, and begin making spiritual commitments together too. I'm still on. So I had a small group that my wife and I led, a couples group starting in 2015. From 2015 to 2020, we were in this group. Well, we had this this kind of group text of the guys, and still to this day, we'd not been in group for 4 years. That's the go-to group text in my life. It is epic what we've experienced just in our text group with these guys. Are my dearest, closest prayer friend kind of warriors together, and love those guys. Carl, Eric, Pat, and Joe, and Ryan. It's the 5 of us, and we're not grouped together anymore, but we are still in group together, even just because of the ongoing, text group. It's been the most important thing.
Yeah. Shout out to the guys. Shout out to the dudes.
Yeah.
I love that. Tell me more about being a dad, because I know your journey with fatherhood has been unique. I'd love to hear more about that.
Yeah. So I experienced a call after this conversion, and after college. I experienced a call to ministry, and began serving college students at the University of Missouri Newman Center as the campus minister in 1997. And just a few days later, actually, as I arrived, I met the woman who would become my wife. I met Jill, and she and I were the same. We had graduated in the same year. We're about the same age, and she was a master's. She was in a master's degree program in education, and I was the campus minister. Mm-hmm. Similarly, and this is an important piece, she was involved with Campus Crusade at Mizzou. I was in this Protestant college. So we were both like in Catholics that were evangelized in these Protestant settings, and then sort of found each other back in the Catholic Church. Mm-hmm. And so a year and a half later, we were married. And in that first year of marriage, we discovered that we weren't going to be able to have kids on our own, that infertility was going to be a part of our story. And as hard as that was, and as sad as we experienced that news, pretty quickly we kind of turned towards the idea of adoption, and began exploring, like, well, Lord, on our wedding, I remember on our wedding night, are you open to receiving, children as a gift from God? And we said yes. And we made a vow to be open to life through our marriage. And so we thought, well, if we can't have kids sort of the typical way, adoption's probably the deal. And so we started looking into different possibilities, private adoption, where you do a home study and like a birth mom chooses you, or international adoptions. And, we know lots of folks who've done that. Mm-hmm. Or the other option was to adopt through foster care. And the first two options, there were a couple of things they had in common. There were a lot of people kind of lined up to do private adoptions, and a lot of people lined up for international adoptions. And both of those were pretty expensive. And we were missionaries at the time, and we had done some kind of mission work and felt a particular call to live on raising money for our salary. And we didn't make a whole lot together at that point. And we also wanted to go somewhere, and this was foster care, where there wasn't a long line, and there was a great need.
Yeah.
And so we discerned a call to be foster parents,
Wow.
with the hope that we would be able to adopt through foster care. And I remember we always joke, like, most parents have 9 months to prepare for their first child, but we had about 9 miles. That was how far we drove
Wow.
to pick up this little boy, 4 months old. Jose was his name. This is in Phoenix, Arizona, and he's a beautiful kid. And so that was our first foster placement in January of 2005. Wow. And then, the goal of foster parenting isn't adoption. The primary goal of foster parenting is reunifying birth families.
Okay.
So your goal is to take care of this child who needs a safe home, a safe place to be temporarily. And sometimes, many times, mom or dad are able to kind of get their life in a place where they can have their kids back. And that's the goal that everybody's working towards with foster care. Sometimes that's not able to happen for whatever reason. And then they need a permanent place for the child to be. And so we had over 2 years, we had 13 kids come through our home, and 4 were able to stay forever. And those are our sons now, Andrew, Christian, Malachi, and Adam. And they're now 18, 19, 20, and 23. Wow. And so yeah, it's been a crazy journey, mostly because I didn't realize, Pete, like I didn't realize that raising kids. Well, first of all, every adoption, every time someone is adopted, it's beautiful, but there's also a trauma connected to it. Yeah. It's not the original design. It's not. Kids are made to be with their mom and dad. That's how God designed, children. And sometimes they can't be with their birth mom and dad. So anytime there's an adoption, there's some kind of disruption. There's some kind of trauma. So trauma is always a part of the backdrop of adoption. And then if it's foster care, there's usually a particular kind of experience of trauma, neglect or abuse or something else. And so parenting kids, in this case 4 boys, who had experienced some trauma, significant trauma in their background, leaves a significant imprint on them. And working with and caring for and loving and helping to raise children who have that as part of their background is different than raising children who maybe don't have a traumatic past. And I don't think I understood that. They tell us that. We go through all sorts of training, but until you're in it and you start to see that certain ways in which I was parented, and we always parent the way that we were parented, naturally. We kind of do what we've experienced. Like the stuff wasn't working, and it was wildly difficult and confusing, and so that was probably the biggest lesson, that it took many years to unlearn and relearn new ways to love and support children in our home who had experienced this traumatic past. Yeah.
It's a powerful story. I mean, one thing that I was just thinking about is, like, I don't know a ton about these processes. So you sharing it is great. I mean, what do you think was one of the biggest misconceptions about adoption that people have?
Yes. Oh, that's good. Well, I do think it's important to kind of give a lay of the land, that how adoptions happen. And you can have open and closed adoptions, and meaning the birth parents and the adoptive families can choose to know who each other are
Mm-hmm.
or not. And so that's just one other little piece, whether it's in foster care or private adoption. That's a decision that both parties, would need to make.
Mm-hmm.
But one of the things that I don't think people know is that the one of the things that was such a blessing is that we we didn't have to go into debt
Yeah.
to do foster care, and that actually the state provides a helpful subsidy to support families for every child that's in their care.
Mm-hmm.
And again, we know that raising kids costs money,
Right.
and so the state acknowledges that. So so then they provide some financial support to the families who are doing that. And so thankfully, we never had to worry about the finances. So that was a nice thing. Whereas if you go the private adoption route or the international adoption route, there isn't that kind of financial support.
Yeah.
So a lot of people have to raise money, which is great.
Mm-hmm.
But I think the other thing that people don't always understand is this trauma narrative around adoption. I don't know if you remember, Pete, and people could look it up, but there was a story about, and this is about 12 years ago, maybe a little longer, of a woman who had in the United States, a woman that had adopted a child from Russia.
Mm.
And in essence, she chose to give him back.
Yeah.
And most of the narrative of that was like, that's awful. I can't believe that. That's terrible. How could you ever send a child back? All of this stuff, just railing on the mom, the adoptive mom. I remember thinking, I get it.
Yeah.
Boy, I don't know if that's the choice I would have made in that circumstance, but dang, man, this is not easy.
Yeah.
This is not easy. And I've since heard of a handful of stories that the most loving thing someone could do for that child or even for themselves is to say, I can't do this.
Yeah.
This child needs someone who can.
Right.
And I had a lot of empathy for that woman.
Mm-hmm.
And I understood how difficult a choice she was making. And it's not black and white.
Yeah. Yeah.
And it's not cut and dry. And she wasn't no, she may have been. I don't know anything about her.
Right.
But just knowing the situation, I wanted to say there's another side to this story here. And that child deserves love. That child deserves respect. That child deserves someone who can care for them in all of their various needs that they have.
Yeah.
But it's also a good thing to acknowledge where the end of your resources are.
Yeah.
And what you can and can't do. And so that was an interesting turning point for me in terms of how people talked about adoption. Was that very few people were empathizing with her. And we had experienced, I think most foster families would understand her situation. Yeah. But again, most people haven't had that experience. So I get it. Because you don't give back your own child. What is that? That's not a thing.
Right.
But in this case, there is that possibility, I guess, before, say, an adoption was finalized.
Yeah. Yeah. And that's powerful. And I think it's really important to hear that message from you because, I would have never thought of that. I don't think a lot of people ever think about something like that, let alone being empathetic to a really crazy scenario, like someone trying to give in the, adoptive child back. So it's right. Important to hear your story.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's I think the other thing that's connected there, Pete, is that foster care and adoption has helped me see the humanity of people in much more nuanced and empathetic ways.
Yeah.
that my initial reactions previous to being a foster parent would have been a lot of judgment on others. Why don't you have it together? What's wrong? Why aren't you taking care of your kids? And I think one of the, like, there's something wrong with you, instead of realizing that everyone is going through some kind of ordeal.
Yeah.
And for some people, their ordeal in life, perhaps self-inflicted in some ways, they still have, they're still trying to do the best that they can.
Yeah.
And I realized that parenting's the best thing we're ever going to be doing.
Yeah.
But then you throw in these other factors of trauma and family disruption and other things.
Yeah.
And sheesh, So I just gained a ton of empathy for families that struggle to be, a good mom. And again, most of the time, not all the time, many times children enter into foster care or coming from single parent families.
Right.
I could never imagine trying to be a solo dad,
Right.
So there's all these things working against folks. And so I gained a lot of empathy, not just for the kids, but also for the moms and dads who, found themselves in these situations, and that I didn't want to jump to conclusions about them, and began to get curious.
Yeah.
How do these things happen for people? How is it that a child gets taken away? What is that person's life like?
Yeah.
What experiences in their life led them to where they are now, that their kids might be in a situation where they can't be taken care of? These are really interesting things to get curious about.
Yeah.
And before I had a lot of judgment.
Yeah.
And not a lot of curiosity. But the thing that started happening was, I can't love a person while I'm judging them. You can't do both at the same time. And the Lord was, I think, calling my wife and I to love not just the kids, but also to begin loving the parents.
Yeah.
There were, so that had been a huge lesson through all of this too.
Wow. I mean, I really love that perspective, because I would never thought about that. I've never thought about that kind of dynamic of, like, hey, like, learning about people and loving them like Christ loves them in their most traumatic, hard part of their life. They're giving a child for adoption. It's not the perfect design, but it's like there's a lot of grace that needs to be given, and you're kind of sharing the perspective. And
I'll tell you, one of the most poignant things that happened was, I remember when one of my sons, it looked like the rights of his parents would be severed.
Okay.
And so then he would be free for adoption. But there was a court hearing. And my son's birth dad was living in a different city. And I remember him calling in, and he was on break. He was working at a fast food restaurant, and he was on a break. And he made the call, and we got to hear it live. And I remember how powerful it was to know that he was there. He called in, and he willfully decided to let go. And he thanked us for what we were doing. And it was one of the most selfless acts I have ever seen.
Yeah.
And those kinds of moments started to change the narrative.
Yeah.
That because the first misconception, particularly about foster care, that we had was that the kids are bad, right? Like there's something wrong with the kids. Well, that's not true. The kids were in an environment that they didn't choose, that don't allow for thriving and health and joy and peace and safety. So it's not the kids' fault. The kids are just responding to, say, the negative environments that they're in, and then you rip them out of there, which they don't want to leave.
Right.
99 times out of 100, no matter how chaotic and traumatic the environment is, that's their mom, that's their dad. And so what happens is a police officer comes to the door, demands that you go with him in his big scary police car, and you get a trash bag to take whatever you can in a trash bag and you carry it with you. That's your life now. Could you imagine that? So you have that, and then you expect that child to be planted in a new house and go, "Oh, this is awesome. Thank you for all that." No, they're like, "No, this is weird. Yeah. This is scary. Who are you? What am I supposed to call you? What do you guys like to eat? Where am I going to sleep?" There's all these things, and they're like, "Well, what's wrong with this kid?" Well, what would you do? And so that is this great unknown. And then, so okay, fine. So now you start to have empathy for the kids. Well, for the longest time, I had judgment for the parents. Oh yeah, these parents are terrible. Gosh, why don't they have their act together? It's get a job, stop smoking, whatever, blah blah blah. Well, then you start to learn about what it turns out they were foster kids too. Huh, interesting. Turns out, they were abused as children, right? And that really started to change things for us. So moving from judgment and fear and the other to hopefully a posture of love and empathy, and just going, what can we do to help? How can we help? We can help temporarily. Can we help long term? What does it look like? Anyway, yeah. So those were some major lessons.
Yeah, I mean, it's raw. It's gritty. It's not perfect. But I mean, everything you're saying, though, is like there's so much grace that needs to be given and is given and received in that. It's just like, it's kind of like, oh, you're like, oh, get a job, raise a kid. And then it's like, at first we were talking about how hard it is for young Catholic guys to make their bed in college. Yeah. You know what I mean? It's like one hand, we start off with like, oh yeah, it's hard to make your bed because your mom does everything for you. And now we're saying like, person who was abused, grew up in foster care, like why can't they just like help this kid when it's like
exactly
the spectrum of and that's it's powerful. It's emotional because it's raising kids is hard, being a kid is hard, living life can be hard, the normalness of life can be hard for a lot of us, and we can't love and judge at the same time. I think is a great thing to remember. So yeah, tell us more like about you being this professional Christian guy, because I think you're a Catholic, a dynamic Catholic speaker, as your career, as who you are. Like, I'd love to hear more about that, and tell me more about Better Preach podcast.
Yeah. Well, I love, I've had a heart and a joy and an experience of many years of getting to teach and preach, and mostly in kind of college ministry settings, and certainly in SPO as we know together. But it has been the prevailing call on my life is to announce and proclaim the gospel, and just and at the same time, when it comes to like the podcast, so this podcast that I do is called Better Preach. It's on developing and delivering great Catholic talks. That's kind of the tagline. And I interview Catholic speakers about what we don't see, kind of what happens before they get the mic, and kind of learning their process of preparing and praying for and practicing talks, and just the whole, kind of art and science of it. Priests, deacons, lay people, religious, just talking to everybody about it. And I've learned a ton. But faith comes through hearing. That's what it says in Paul's letter to the Romans. And but we're not going to hear unless someone preaches, and they're not going to preach unless they're sent. And there's a certain way in which the podcast is a sending of people, is reminding people that that's how faith is passed on. People need to hear a verbal proclamation, just like I did in college. I needed to hear it, and then be given an opportunity to respond to its promises. And so some years back, I was talking to a Catholic friend of mine saying like, yeah, I'd love to do a podcast. I've always wanted to do a podcast, but I'm not sure about what. And he said, well, how about this? What would be one topic that you're super passionate about that you could imagine talking about, every week, for the rest of your life? Like, what would that topic be? And immediately I said, preaching.
Mhm.
I don't know what that means, but I would talk about preaching. And it wasn't that I was going to preach. It was I just want to talk about preaching. And he's like, all right, man. And so that idea sat there for a couple of years. In fact, pretty quickly, I got the idea of kind of flipping it of like, well, let's talk about what we don't see and what happens behind the scenes. So I had the idea in like 2018, but it was 2022 when I finally did it. And so, yeah, I've been doing this podcast called Better Preach since June of 2022, and put episodes out mostly once a week, not every week because I'm not even yet at 100 episodes, but I'm almost there. But it has been an absolute blast, and so I do interviews, I do some solo episodes. I have a trusty occasional co-host who sometimes we talk, and it's been one of the best things that I've been able to do, because there's something really powerful about podcasts. Yeah. This can happen, these kind of conversations, because podcasts make it so.
For anyone out there, if you're listening to this, you hear this, like, you need to check out Better Preach if you're trying to become a better speaker, because it's going to give you the tools you need to grow in that. And there aren't a lot of, I don't really know if there's any other podcasts really in the Catholic world that are kind of doing what you're doing. So, I mean, it's a good service to a lot of people out there.
Yeah. There is one other that's similar, and it started, I was there first, so I will say that, but there is one similar that is primarily for priests. Okay. America Media put together a podcast called Preach, and they kind of examine the upcoming Sunday and give a sample homily and then kind of talk about it. So that's something that they're doing, which I think is really great, because it's really geared towards helping priests and deacons who are giving homilies. Mine is a bit broader as to just talks, teaching, preaching, testimonies, any kind of like speaking to Catholic audiences. Yeah. And therefore anybody could listen, and if they want to grow as a communicator, regardless of religious setting, it can be helpful. Yeah. Also, regardless of Catholic, Protestant. Yeah. I have a number of Protestant guys, pastors who listen to, and that's super cool. Yeah. I had a few opportunities at the National Eucharistic Congress this past summer, where I had random people coming up to me saying, "Hey, dude, I love your podcast." I'm like, "I don't even know you. Who are you?" And that just was such an honor. And so anyway, it's such a fun thing to be doing, and we just get to sit here in our basement or in your bedroom, and make it happen.
Well, Ryan, this has been great. I really appreciate you taking the time to share. I mean, talking about your story, your fatherhood story, adoption, media, podcast. I feel like we've covered a lot. And I mean, I feel like you're able to touch so many people's lives because of where you're following God. Yeah. Fatherhood, media, like conversion, campus ministry, by following God, you'll be able to touch so many people's lives. Yeah. So thank you for your yes to God, and thank you for coming on here. It's been awesome to talk to you.
Well, thank you for being the voice in the wilderness that you are, and online and in podcasting. And I know God has had a call on your life to preach, basically. And that's what you've been doing. And I honor you for that. And thanks for having me on. I was thrilled to jump on with you.
Awesome. Yeah. I'm crying saying thank you. All right, everyone. Thank you so much for checking in, everyone. Appreciate you. Make sure you go check out Better Preach, Instagram, Apple, Spotify, and make sure you like and subscribe here so you never miss an episode. And as usual, I'll talk to y'all soon. Love y'all. Peace. Bye.